know some of you have been writing and typing up. We can get the full set to Sam later if you've got other things you want included. But we're really looking, because we've got 8 groups, we've got to do it quite quickly. So you've got 2.5 minutes, and if you overrun, you don't get any drinks at the end, okay? So, I'm going to start, we'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, to prove we can get up to 8. Petra's group, red group.
Is it okay if this is collected?
You're
so
going
everybody's going to say one thing.
You can say one thing if it fits into 2.5 minutes.
Yes, we will.
First thing is to challenge the word foreseeable and replace it perhaps with uncertainty.
Sorry, could you speak? Oh.
Yeah. To challenge the word foreseeable and replace it with uncertainty.
Okay. To put together kind of teams of economists and sociologists and architects who, as a team, have the capacity to visualize existing and new possible forms of living, socioeconomic relations, new ways of spatializing our anxiety and our desire.
Okay.
Well, we came up with an idea that, in fact, the third bullet point will be answered much more effectively by Patrick Eddy's.
Right.
Yes.
Passing the buck backwards.
Yes.
The importance of putting people and their health at the centre of planning rather than leaving them on the periphery.
The importance of trying to engage with communities that don't actually exist yet.
And the final point was about looking at a new ownership model, looking at cooperative and for the future of owning buildings. Okay.
So, aspirations to push the boundaries and the edges, be more imaginative, going beyond the core of what it is now.
Yeah.
Excellent. Group 2, well done, Group 1.
Thank you.
Group 2. And under time, I am impressed.
This is just the question one.
We get the deduct.
No, that's the whole lot, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we struggled with question one. We felt that collective strategies need to be stakeholder-based, integration of existing and new spaces under the sense of community, which is at the moment more of a strap line than a strategy. Infrastructure driven as well and capable of taking the knowledge economy forward with usual components. We were a bit negative then. We felt there was a lack of creativity and capacity for everybody to self-organise and drive this particular process of change forward, and we were still lingering under the notion of a nanny state. Second thing, we needed to restore trust in the professional bodies, because we think they're failing and just going around in circles, repeating the same mistakes time and time again, be it from land and property or built environment, and therefore there was the need for these types of structural changes, or deep structural changes, which were referred to by the others. These flat structures for decision making are synchronous and synergetic, good public spaces integrated into workspaces, green spaces, etc., etc. And in terms of active collaboration, this is one that was really taxing. All we knew was that it should be people-based, human-scale, dialogue-driven, have active champions forcing the agenda, driven from the bottom up, and also careful to be intergenerational, carry youth as well as the adult population.
Excellent.
Very good. So you're very bottom up. You've got to get some kind of a narco-syndicalist model where you actually get people together to focus on delivery. Very good. Well done. Group 3. And you've got to avoid anarchy, I suppose.
Yes, that's
we strayed slightly, so I'm going to answer the questions in terms of 4 Ps. One is philosophy, and that was it's quite interesting that great emphasis was about setting out ambition and places on the continent, describing their aspirations, to align to a cultural idea about what is the common good, and perhaps we've been a bit more fearful about stating what it is that we want to achieve, and that's aligned to a sort of discredited formulaic approach to master planning, which was, as it were, developer-led with vested short-term interests. So philosophy is incredibly important. Processes, the idea that master planning does what it needs to do in order to satisfy statutory requirements, but it's not actually doing necessarily the right thing, that the process is much more about corporate linking and layering up of interests and agendas. It's much more about a corporate bringing together of budgets in terms of the delivery as well. In terms of the product, working with uncertainty. So in other words, we're not working to deliver a specific end state. What we're really seeking to achieve are to set in place the conditions that will allow happy accidents to happen over time, and some of those will evolve from local community ownership. And the last thing was, the fourth P was players. So that implied that it's about not just for new development, it's also about working with existing communities, because a master plan has a hard and a soft edge to it, so dimension to it. So it's not just about the physical, it's also about how do you build social capital, how do you create social networks, how do you build human achievement. So you have to have different skill sets. Therefore, the master plan isn't the man with a vision. It's about having different facilitative, collaborative, bringing together of ideas and engaging with communities in different ways. So philosophy, process, product, and players.
Okay, so enabling conditions for happy accidents seems to be a theme from earlier. Yeah, this kind of collaborative to cohabitation theme is running through this group.
Okay, I'll do this in
group 3.
Yeah, kind of 4 headings or chapters. The first one is leadership in crisis, and we talked about the need for leadership in amongst all this. Key factor, the example Salford Quays was offered. That's dereliction, but it's now transformed. Although there's still issues about divisions between have and have-nots in that situation, but they need to be brave. And the second factor in this issue is about crisis, and how a crisis can often act as a catalyst for change. So that happened in Dundee in 1979. Cities in the doldrums, task force was put together. I think Stuart Gulliver was involved in that. So that's got some new thinking, a new focus for the city, and that's all been built on following that process. The next kind of heading is under community. There was a discussion around how we need to think about the wider issues around community. Lifestyles are more individualistic, so getting people involved is quite difficult. People will get involved, but generally there's a reaction. So that led on to a discussion about charrettes and whether people would get involved in a more positive way through the charrette process. Discussion about it, I think, has already been talked about, the balance between the time scale and the kind of the involvement of people in the charrette and the kind of vision that comes out of that. But other examples of house builders getting involved in local schools in terms of talking about their plans. We had quite a lot of discussion about local authorities as the prime mover, and a good example is South Lanarkshire, who are now working in collaboration with the housing industry and agreeing land releases so there's certainty. It's not a case of just a numbers game, it's about trying to work out what is the best way, shape of new housing development there. So leadership, again, important. Public sector as facilitator in that instance, and dialogue and goodwill. An example from Finland of the public sector as prime mover. Again, housing developers have uncertainty. Land ownership is crucial, but values can get in the way of that. But local authorities can unlock economic potential if they think creatively about this process. Local authorities should be managing spatial change, not defending the development plan. And the last bit is about policy. I used the example of Melbourne, where they have an exhibition, postcode 3000 just now, talking about how the code's changed. That's transformed the city centre from 600 dwellings to 23,000 over 20 years. So we need to look at models like that. We've got empty properties in town centres. We need to find mechanisms for unlocking potential there. What's the purpose of town centres? It is changing. So there's economic opportunities around small businesses, as Stuart Gulliver was talking about, but we need to get away from having a risk-averse planning system. It needs to be innovative and creative in terms of taking these opportunities, and that links us back to kind of wider issues around policy, government policy around an assets-based approach and co-production could inform that kind of process, which brings us back to leadership.
Okay, so collaborative, bottom-up, but with corporate coming in, and now leadership and vision of public agencies like local authority coming through stronger. How did this group get on?
Our report, we didn't really answer any of the questions, so I feel that's a really interesting conversation. It really began with this observing which context we're in shapes our discussion quite dramatically. I mean, that's financial, physical context, whatever. And the discussion earlier, the presentations that ranged from sort of Shanghai to sort of extensions of place in Scotland, rather than simply these new huge-scale places. The point you were making about the same generic rules you apply. So we're quite interested in looking at what sort of generic circumstances there are. And one of the things that became clear was this relationship between living and working and the changing dynamics of that. This 40% number of 1,000 and under was quite interesting to us. So we began talking about the relationship between live, work, and why our living environments now are not nearly as good as they were. We were looking at Glasgow tenement, for example, is excellent, or new towers in Canada and Toronto would be much, much better than anything we can do here. And why is that? And how does that then meet affordability? Became an issue. So then we talked about affordability. And the social acceptability of renting in this country became an issue, and how the rental market should integrate much more closely with commerce. And there was an example given of Sainsbury, B&Q, TK Maxx, then rented apartments in the garden on top of Sandwich, which I thought was a really kind of interesting model, probably for many of them, I can imagine. We thought the idea of, I mean, there's the usual sort of moaning about mass developer housing, but the idea that you sort of harness that and take it and make some urban contribution is probably something that we're interested in. I certainly have something here. I think we could do something with that, and how that connects then to work centres and so on is interesting. Infrastructure, obviously, we need to be thinking of future infrastructure plans. A good point that was made, the economic master plan we all buy into, but how do we interpret it? Is it about how we are delivering now, and where do values enter into that? It isn't simply about economics. We were looking at economics like 15 years ago, developing a strategy for a permanent urban place compared to now. Quite different things. So where do values enter into that? The institutional actors who are involved, they should be created with the master plan. And really extending that then is that it's not purely private in the future, it's public-private partnerships, and that public constituency of support should be ongoing consultation, not simply charrette, stop. And I would give the example of Dundee in there, where there was mass consultation at the beginning, but less so as it's tailed off, and any change that might come in the master plan now is very guarded, so everything's been fixed since almost 10 years ago, and it's not very accommodatable to change because of this public consultation that happened right at the start. Final point is we ended on a very deep cynicism of charrettes. Very strong words for this time used. Sophisticated selling. I'll leave it.
So, work style and demographic indicators of changing, lifestyle and work style. The importance of economics and affordability and deliverability on that, and the institutional mechanisms and underpinning, so almost going further than the local authority lead that was coming out of some of the others. So we're getting some interesting themes emerging. Well done, Group 5. Group 6, what have we got there?
In terms of collective strategies, we started talking about master plans as supporting platforms for change. Effectively, we're talking about communication tools, and master planning has got to be a framework or a vision. And core to any master planning is that it has to be part of the democratic process. In our discussions, we emphasise placemaking, but placemaking can be a state of mind. It doesn't just have to be physical change. Master plans shouldn't be too detailed. We mustn't watercolour the front door. They're business plans for the place, setting out basic principles, and they could be diagrammatic or they could be prose. And how we might deliver that might be joint ventures, for example, but it's about sort of spreading value and community involvement. In terms of active collaboration, we felt it was particularly important to work with schools because they are the inheritors. And we talked about the 2001 master plan in Dundee and the big event, but also the ongoing work in terms of online forums and the active website that Dundee City Council has. And it's important to have these internal feedback loops to keep people on board and abreast of what's happening in that process of change. And in terms of sort of the business involvement, in terms of managing individual assets, it's really important that there are these feedback loops. In terms of effective master planning, it has to be about people in place. It's about a long-term vision and evolving life cycle. So for us, master planning is very much about a process, but that depends very much on context. So therefore, any type of master planning has to be flexible, it has to be adaptable, future-proofed and integrative rather than zoned. And it has to demonstrate belief. And importantly, we were talking about the need for a master plan to attract investment. So this is about investment in places, it's not just about development. And in terms of delivery, we felt that it was important to consider the institutional qualities that are necessary. So this was about, for example, thinking about the Dundee Partnership, which is absolutely committed to change, and it's about individuals who are committed to that change. Necessary then to have that leadership from the top, and that's about officers as well as politicians, but it's also about the individuals. It's critical for master planning to work, to be effective, that is supported by stable politics, but it's also about a sense of responsibility and commitment by those people who are there working on the ground. And Alan very passionately said, it's about a sort of sense of bloody-mindedness, and it's our turn.
So business plans for placemaking was kind of what and that implied it was a collective of people who bought into it. So very good. On to the next one, group 7. What about group 6?
Well, the starting point of having a plan is that it's not just market-driven, that there has to be a vision. It has to be a vision about an urban area. But the key thing that we feel is foreseeable is that value chains will link regional, local, and transnational actors. And it links them through the way in which we see processes happening in urban areas. And we sometimes need plans to help us move beyond the more immediate understandings of value that sometimes a developer might have if acting alone. So we need to reason spatially to support the emergence of civic and trust-based action in local communities in relation to these larger value chains. The second point is that we need to use a strategic briefing process. It must have a clear vision of a decision chain. So our focus is very much on the idea that local people, together with larger, perhaps regionally based or transnational actors, all make decisions. And so we should have a clear understanding of the decisions that can be made at any point in time. And that this should inform our strategic briefing rather than the planning of single function spaces. Finally, master plans should think about design in relation to these decisions that are at hand at any moment in time. So a lot of the time that might mean that we're thinking quite broadly about design principles that will inform the way in which a municipality will engage in the pre-planning process with potential developers. Plans are neither so much municipality-driven or developer-driven, they're value-driven. So they're value-driven, and so in a way developers may be the ones to pursue them, but always in the context of having their activities shaped by an engagement with a decision-making process that includes local people. They, in this sense, then should always be thought of as enabling rather than restricting.
So master plans and master planning as a kind of enabling scoping of an uncertain future that's a dialogue, not as a prescriptive blueprint that doesn't necessarily have to be about development. Some of it is about more spatial thinking, perhaps, beyond very specific development.
Well, I think one has to be careful about being clear about the particular distinctions and relationships between what is meant by prescriptive and what is transparent. I think we have to hold on to transparency, and that often implies that we need to be clear about what it is that we're saying people will get. And I think that design reasoning has to inform that. So we need to show how design can evolve, or how design development can take place within the context of certainty and transparency for local citizens.
So a spatial reasoning, the way that lots of people would be trained in verbal reasons.
Yeah.
Very good. Well done, Group 7. Group 8. Can you talk about what's left?
The group structure was interesting because you have policy thinkers, policy shapers,
policy makers and then policy doers. So it gave us a nice round discussion. Fortunately, Peter's gone, but I thought he'd make the most interesting start to this by saying that how do you have a conversation about a place in 20 years? And that seemed to underpin everything. Start with that before naming anything. And he said a couple of other things as well, that how do you speak to new people? New people are going to come and live there, and also they're going to have to build there. So this idea about the vision, you've got to get a lot of different people from different areas who don't exist. He was being quite honest in his approach for his authority. How on earth do you do that? So you have to bring existing people in that area with you, which is all about influencing their behaviours, because we talked about how people use their cars and their environments as it stands at the moment. And this idea about just the word master implying there's some deep or dark purpose potentially that's driving this vision that might not be actually collaborative. And Nigel referenced the idea about just calling them frameworks. So there's this idea inherently in the process that just simple languages could start to dispel those myths. But I really like the idea about this thing, not calling it a master plan, just having a conversation about a place and just starting from there.
Not the master plan. Not the master plan, master plan. A lot of this is about collaboration, bottom-up, synthesis, time, exploring the future. Several of you talked about people who aren't there yet, or businesses who aren't there yet, or how do we deal with the unknown, not just of place, but unknown of people who may be coming. So a lot of it is trying to manage the unknown and uncertainties, but provide certain levels of confidence, and I don't want to use specificity anymore, but some kind of frame or framework within which people have some kind of shared confidence. What that's been a fantastic range. If you've got other comments in your group, could you make them available to Hussam, because we will get them written up, either making them available today, or if you want to type them up. I know some people will be typing during it, do it afterwards. We're also looking for any feedback that you've got on the event, because there will be other events coming. So, you know, just in terms of the same intelligence feedback loop that I think Deborah's group we're looking at it for the event from today. We're now going to get a short response, really representing people like landowners, developers, investors, the kind of people who traditionally have been asked to invest. Sometimes they control the master plan, sometimes they are delivering a piece or a parcel or a segment of the master plan. So Steve Tolson, who many of you will know, is going to give us that. Steve, I think it's all loaded up. Steve, as most of you know, is a chartered surveyor, so he's got an RICS hat, but he's been involved in many housing projects, other commercial development projects. He's been involved in health projects, and he was also been involved in lots of steering groups of looking at research into how to deliver better places and better products. So Steve, over to you. And then I think there was a little bit that we didn't get from Petra on the Charette Plus. We're going to see if that connects in terms of delivery and whether it answers some of the things, some of the conundrums that are coming up. So I hope you got an answer. Sorry.
Yes.
Steve, over to you.
I was just about to. No, I've lost the reference, never mind. David Adams, it's a good place to start probably, because a lot of the work's been happening in the last 3 years, 4 years perhaps now, stem from Scottish Government coming to RICS and asking them about some issues related to regeneration. And we managed to instigate a piece of work done by Professor Adams, who's left the room, on delivering better places, which led then to Stuart Gulliver and myself writing another piece, which is published and available, on how a lot of that learning could be implemented in Scotland. So, and some of these are kind of, it's called the 10 propositions, but this is not absolutely the 10 propositions, and I'm going to not bore you with all of them, but it relates to the economic performance where we are today. And the first thing I would say, and I heard it being commented just now, was that let's not worry too much about the current recessionary kind of period, because when we have that kind of conversation, we're only looking at now time, and this is not now time. We should not be debating now time, because it'll take 12 years for the Dundee waterfront now time, and there isn't that much on the park. So, you know, it does take a long time. It takes time to make a place. But what we need to think about is this investment. and I heard the word developers used a lot. The first thing I would say is, can we just forget about developers and just focus on place and what it takes? And it takes investment because it's long term. Development is an in and out process. Another important point is about the ownership. The ownership, who owns the land, who owns the property, controls the show. Regulation is kind of trying to shape it, but by and large, it's all about ownership. So what we need to do is kind of think about some of the innovation stuff and what role the state plays in these things. Because currently, we're getting swamped in the private sector, and I know the public sector will say this, you're getting absolutely swamped by procurement rules and regulations. And it's creating, there's a lack of traction, I think is the phrase that's used. And nobody likes it, even the public officials said, we hate it. So what we need is some territory for entrepreneurial action. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it through partnership. We're going to see the state as a prime mover. So the role of the state must go beyond the regulatory function. It must go beyond just saying, I'm going to promote it. It must get stuck in and do it. And we're seeing that at Dundee, so well done. But we need to do it at a right scale. And what we're doing at the moment, and I'm not sure, I'm going to watch Dundee very interestingly because I've given them a lot of compliments. But we need to do it at the right scale. And that scale is about community. Because it's about the people, ultimately. So we need to start breaking it up. Not these massive sites for house builders to build 7,000 houses on. Thank you. We need to get it down to the street level. And that means we're working about sort of things like cooperatives and that sort of kind of scale. Because that's what happens in Europe. A lot of what I'm saying is about European practice, good practice. And that will flow into all sorts of other activity, like training and employment. We need a better financial system, which means that the state has got to start investing in it. So we have some form of investment partnership bank. So we get a community bankers trust, which is on the table at the moment. So get the third sector involved. Lots of credit unions. Glasgow's got assets in its credit unions of over £200 million. It's actually, how do you capture that asset base for the benefit of everybody? But finally, long-term investment is the name of the game. So, place is a public good. Somebody else said that earlier on.
Stuart.
No. What you said.
So you're in tune.
We're on tune. So, who's the client of this place? So, as I say, it's the investor, not the developer. Little diagram. So, who is the investor? It's the citizen occupying tenant on the top, and acting collectively. One might describe that as a community. We've got the state, and then we've got external players like investors and funders and so on. So these are the players. There's no house builder in this diagram because they've not got a stake other than an in and out. Okay, bit of history lesson. The political influences on planning and development. Well, we know about the socialist approach. That's centrally planned. Everything is done the way the masters say. And since 1979, in the United Kingdom, we've been doing more of the right side. Red and blue, market, polarised corporate offer. That's what's happened over 30 years. We have had a polarisation, and those that are providing the offer tend to be the big, big organisations. If you look at what house building is done in the United Kingdom, a substantial portion of it, I think it's 40% is done by 3 house builders. So this is how it works. Since the 1980s, we have a free market delivery. Land is all owned and controlled by the developer. And what the state is doing a reactive planning regulation, trying to do the best they possibly can. But what happens is you end up with a very low bar when it comes to quality. Take the Northern European exemplar, which is basically Germany, Holland, and Scandinavia. I've called it a mixed market delivery, where the land is controlled by the state, not in every case, but many cases. So you have a proactive plan by the state participates and also regulates as well. So that bar is much, much higher than it is in the United Kingdom. So what I'm advocating is to try and come up with something which kind of reflects what is happening over there. So I see a situation where we could have the land controlled by the state. There's plenty of assets owned in Scotland by the state. I could reel them all off in Edinburgh and so on and so on. Every city's got one. And it would be probably in some form of joint venture with a JV investor coming down, because the state having assets is very attractive to somebody like a pension fund, because it's safe stuff. So you can put your assets in, you put your cash into it, and you're involved in the community. And you get on with it. So you can fund that state infrastructure. Dundee's funded it in a slightly different way, with a lot of emphasis on prudential borrowing, I think. But there are various ways of doing this. And that means that if you create that framework, then you can decide what scale this is delivered at, which is the European model. So you're getting right down to small and medium. It's what I would call multi-participation, as somebody else mentioned multi-participation earlier on. So you get private developers, but you decide what size the private developer can play. It could be 50 units, it could be 100 units, whatever. But it also means you can get right down to custom build, and you individually could go and buy a plot. I just picked this. Tom Shaps spoke at the ADS Design Symposium last year. Great guy, massive guy, 6'8" or so. And I just lifted that as a quotation. I'm not going to go right through it, but the residents shape their own city, he says. And the local authority, along with the government, is also often the landowner and decides on how to build, so that backs up what I'm saying. And the land is leased out, which means that in the long term, the city maintains a position that is financially strong and therefore influential. Really important point. They did this in the Vinex. I'm sure many people in the room will know about the Dutch Vinex, which was actually the national planning framework, the fourth one, in 1993. Scotland's on its third at the moment. But unlike Scotland, this is about the state getting into the action. 500,000 houses in that period, delivered through a national and regional and a municipality scale. Oh, and by the way, just so you know, because I was talking about ideology and politics, and how in the last 30 years we've had unfettered free market slavery. Well, this was done by centre-right rulers, so it isn't about ideology in terms of right and left, it's about common sense in my book. But the Dutch don't just say, I'm happy to live in a small place, in a highly dense place. These are big, massive, detached. That's a detached house. It's 3,500 square feet plus. So the people are not different. You know, they say, oh, yeah, but Europe's different, they're a different culture. Well, I don't think they are. I think if you actually speak to them, they want the same stuff as most people in this country do. Eiburg, which was a Vinex project, just outside Amsterdam. I can't say, some good parts of Eiburg and some pretty grotty parts. This is with no codes. That's with no codes in Eiburg. And that's with codes. Very quickly, this interesting thing about this is a classic sort of contemporary Amsterdam townhouses. I spoke to the project manager about this, thinking, how the hell did you put all that together? And it's self-built. I said, well, you must have built the party walls. And she just laughed at me. I said, no. So we just sell the property, and it's up to the individuals to sort it out. Now, can you imagine that happening here? So we've got a long way to go. This is a suburban street just outside Arnhem. Again, just the simplicity of it. So let's not go towards thinking about master plans and painted front doors and so on. Because it doesn't matter about the buildings. If you look at Dutch housing, it's no great shakes in terms of its architecture. You can see the repetition. But the dedication to the landscape and the simplicity of the street makes that a good street. That's looking the other way. Look at that. This is about 10 years old, is this development. So another place, Tubingen. I would really recommend you go to Tubingen, just south of Stuttgart. This is a scheme which was bought by the municipality. They bought the French barracks as they were treated in 1993. This photograph is of a home zone, and that's a care home. The pink building is a care home. The important point is, you can't quite make out, but there's people who live in this care home are sitting out on the street. I can walk up, as I did, up here and engage with the people here. Whereas in our country, care homes shut away, till the end of your life. So it's actually bringing things together. And how did we do it? Well, as I say, the city led that development. They created the place framework. It's 4,000 people. It's actually in 3 different bits. But by putting in that infrastructure, they carved it up. They brought in what they call the private building companies, which are essentially cooperatives, which included single people and family people. What we've got in this country is detached houses. Since 1982 in Scotland, 41% of all houses built were detached houses. We do not get the range. So if you're an older person, or getting old soon like me, and want to trade down, I've got nowhere to go if I want new build. And frankly, I do want new build because Scottish Power is going to charge me an arm and a leg, so I want something nice and new, and it's going to be dead cheap to run. But I can't get it.
We want the very place for you.
Thank you very much.
Right at the door.
Buenos Aires. Fantastic. But the important point is that these co-ops can comprise of a whole different sizes, so you can get them done as low as 5 or 30. So there's a playing on this co-op. It's not co-ops like the sort of original co-ops of Denmark, or it could be if you wanted, but it's essentially bringing the shared ownership into the place. So Tubingen bought the barracks, created the vision and concept, we've heard that before. They created the enabling site preparation stuff, they put in the infrastructure and sold the plots, and then they come back and manage the place. And in those plots, here's a co-op, they have the vision, but it's actually promoted. You have to find the start, you have to find the co-op, so the state plays that role in marketing and finding individuals who will then take it on and find other people to create the cooperative entity. And then they enter into an option agreement, they get in, they instruct architects, and they work it up, and then when they've got everything in place, they buy the plot and build, and then occupy, and then manage along with the state. Tubingen University did a bit of research on this. They said that the costs were 15 to 20% less than developers. Well, that's about the developer's margin, if you're lucky. The higher design standards, specification standards, good resettling. But this is the important point here I'd like to get across. Because the core people came together, it was them, they had a real community. Whereas if you're in a house builder situation in a greenfield, there is no community. So they've actually created a community from the start by building their places and working together. So they've grown together. And as a consequence, they've got a much better social balanced mix. And there it is. So you can see the difference of the blocks. There's different co-ops, 3 or 4 or 5 different co-ops in that particular street. There's another street, so it's kind of home zone-ish. It's all very human. Across the road from Tubingen, this is just a German house builder doing their own thing. So it's quite different. You can see the different character contrasts there. So, lessons. German and Dutch, they're no different to us. They like the space accommodation, and they do aspire to detached houses. But they're a bit more pragmatic, and they recognise that they have to let go of some of that and live in joined force. But what they won't trade is the space. So if you look at that, the average UK new build is 76 square metres. In Germany it's 100, Netherlands 116, and Denmark is skonking 137 square metres, which is nearly twice as much, isn't it? Nearly. So we need to do something about that. They've got very good leaders, and the way the system works, it seems to me, in Germany and Holland, is that the people trust their politicians. Yeah. And you just think that's an anathema here. Absolute anathema. So people trust the politicians, and the politicians trust the people. That's a very good, stable platform to do some interesting things. The Dutch and Germans value good places in terms of what they are and the landscape and how they look after them. We're not good at that either. So state gets involved. It acts as the vision, it acts as the leader, it does the enabling. But planners in places like Germany and Holland, they have a key role. They're at the top table. We're not at the top table as planners. But they see it as a long-term investment. So, you know, Iberg, they've got over 40-year loan out on Iberg. I guess same might be for Dundee. It's a fairly long loan, I suspect, over at Dundee. So, things to think about. State should play the role as prime mover. That's what Stuart said, and that's what I said. We need to have dynamic leaders. We need to think about how we do that in terms of joint venture, because I don't think the skills are in the state. The state has been used to doing it in Germany and Holland, so they have got good skills there. We stopped doing that in Newtown Development Corporations a long time ago. So we have to sort of think about different ways of doing it, and joint ventures is a way. Get it split up into small, because we need definitely to have small, because small gives us choice. And that means I can have a small house to retire to, amongst others. And we need to think about it as investment, not development, to get that full benefit. Final slide. If we don't think about small, we're going to carry on like we did before 2008 and we all went imploded. We're going to end up with more and more big. In 1973, Schumacher wrote Small is Beautiful. He died in 1977. God help him if he'd have been alive now and what he would have said about giantism. This is a picture of Tesco. Tesco store, big store, sublet to Domino's and Subway, and a whole raft of massive flats above it. It's entirely Tesco town. That's Woolwich. That's what we will have. And just to kick at planners, and planners are supposed to be regulating this public realm, and they're not. Thanks for listening.
So it's not about developers and development, it's a longer term investment in placemaking, it's more collective, but the state has to play a role in some form to bring in other people, whether they're pension funds or co-ops or individuals or specialist developers. So that's the proposition there. I just want to check with Petra, is that still compatible with the more collective charrette plus mechanism? Because there's a lot of consultation at stages in that.
I think I would say that the shared plus model actually takes it a step further, and I think it's just particularly because of the circumstances we find ourselves in Scotland, with Stephen touched on that, it's the sort of public sector reform agenda, there's community planning, and I have to say, there's just one point. I mean, you're right, Mercy. You're right that German people trust their politicians, but they also trust their professionals. I think if you can't go in there as an architect, you go in there because you're part of the community. Yeah. So you don't just leave your architect hat on or your planner hat on. You are part of that community. And when we compare, we need to always be careful. Our local government is very remote from the populace here. I mean, we've got an average 120,000 people per local authority. In Germany and in some other European, Northern European, it's 5,000. So you're much more rooted. So you actually have a pulse, you have a finger on the pulse of what the community wants, and you're part of it.
Yeah. Local government reorganisation as well.
Yeah, I think that will happen, I think, after September 14th.
You've got 10 minutes. Do you want to just give some headlines for...
Yeah, just very quickly, because I did have to cut my presentation short, but I did want to leave it, especially prompted by somebody who said that they felt charrette was actually not the flavour of the month. I came round to charrette quite late in the day because it was something that came and it was piloted into Scotland, and I thought, well, this is just another form of engagement. I'm now a total convert to charrette, and I am a convert because I see it now as an opening up to other infrastructure within the public sector. And the charrette plus model that we are advocating in Planning A is exactly that. It brings in the spatial planning together with community planning. And earlier on it was talked about that we have to think about the delivery model, we have to think about what we're leaving behind. And it's precisely that, because if we're going in and engaging with the community, we need to make sure that the elected members are there, we need to make sure that we have the community plan being there as a starting point, because a lot of investment around public services hangs in the community plan. Now, if we then have the community plan, we must try and bring the spatial expression into that. That's why I like the coming together of community planning in Scotland, which is a government function, local government function, with the spatial expression, and bringing those together. And then I think there's a third element to it, which is what I like so much, is that if we're doing it right, we're then actually tapping into unlocking what's called social capital, making sure that what's already on the ground, because don't assume that communities are just there doing nothing. They themselves are very active. They're engaged in lots and lots of volunteering activities, lots of activities that they like, be it in schools, be it in golfing activities, be it in singing, or looking after the elderly, or doing befriending, all sorts of things. That's what we should be tapping into, and that's where I think the Charrette Plus model can be really, really making new traction. In terms of delivery, because everybody says, oh, it's very expensive, it doesn't have to be. It can be done relatively inexpensive if you use volunteering model. The one we had in Tubingen had 17 volunteers, architects and planners, transportation engineers and others, together with associates, architects, planners leading the process, and some staff, but of course the community itself. So there was a huge buy-in. We went into the schools, but we also developed with the community. There was an action plan from it that is now going to be delivered by the community planning team, because let's be honest, they have got the resources. So I am wanting to make a plea, don't just think of it as it is now, think of it what it could be. That's really, really important. Thank you.
As a means, as a vehicle.
Yeah.
A couple of things. One, I don't think that paying attention to the human scale or the community scale necessarily implies one shouldn't think in terms of large plans. One of the things that I think is fundamentally advantageous about large plans is that you can use them to describe how differentiation takes place in order to accommodate differences amongst communities. So I think understanding the way in which one place might differ from another is one of the functions of a large plan. And I think this is why some of these very large plans have been effective, because one can start to see variation appearing as part of the spatial reasoning about future possibilities. What that, I think, is also, there's a difference in the way in which large plans are conceived in Germany versus the Netherlands. And I think some of the Netherlands cases show a rather inconsequential understanding of difference. That it's more about, sometimes I think it can be about decoration or and rather trivial understandings of differentiation, rather than things that truly enable new forms of collaboration to appear. So I think there's a danger in some of the Dutch patterns of planning to look at. The final thing to say is, I've been involved in a number of instances in Spain of involving the local community in charrettes. The big thing to look out for is when the state doesn't put their cards on the table at the same time, when they fail to be transparent. And then, in fact, and this is one reason to agree with the team that was doubting the charrette, it can be used as a way to find out what local people want and then do an end run around it, unless government is asking the question in good faith. And a number of the times that I was there, I just felt, in fact, the state was using it as an opportunity to act in bad faith.
We've got about 4 minutes till, we've got drinks and networking in the lobby in the foyer, which I could guarantee is a lot cooler. But just any final thoughts or comments from anyone around the table, either in response or coming out of the afternoon?
I just wanted to comment on Stephen's very interesting presentation and bringing ideologies to the table, and it really struck me that this afternoon we'll be talking about master planning. What Stephen put onto the table was the whole issue of land ownership. So we've actually ended up talking about issues of governance, which I think are absolutely fundamental to this. And there is sadly a tendency in the United Kingdom where we sell the family silver, and the inheritance is therefore lost. So I just really wanted to thank Stephen for putting that on the table.
So governance sits with, I think leadership was coming out here earlier on. Some other points that you've got out there. Yes.
So I was going to say, a lot of people in Britain seem to think that the government owning something is something that just shouldn't be done. I don't understand why we're quite happy for the Chinese government to own a nuclear power station, but we don't want to own one ourselves. I just don't understand that. Someone explain that to me one day.
We have a lot of people from a kind of Tea Party mentality here that we don't call it a Tea Party, but all government is bad, and that some of that is also effectively coming out of some of the thinking going into not just health and media, it's going into schools and schooling. So there is something there. We're getting now a big wave into this country from different, and I'm saying this, I work in parts of the country with people like UKIP, councillors I'm dealing with in Suffolk and so on. There is one, but all government anywhere is bad. So there are those things permeating through approaches to communities and otherness and things like that. So I think that, watch out, because I feel it's getting bigger.
Yeah.
Some other headlines and thoughts that you got out this afternoon. Yes, sorry.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to, well, actually, I'd like to say simply that I thought the speakers were excellent, and I really enjoyed listening to them. Having said that, I did want to make a point. It's really about long-term investment, and it really hasn't been heard yet, and it's about education. There are a lot of people in this room who are actually educators of planners and architects, and one of the problems, we're looking at this kind of German and Dutch model and comparing it to ourselves and wringing our hands and pulling our hair. I think one of the problems is a kind of visual and spatial literacy, and I don't think we teach it very well here. I mean, we do at the university level, but it's not big on the curriculum for excellence, for instance, and we're actually educating the next generation of people who are going to be either the part of the community process, or they're going to be electing the executors who are going to be making, the design and planning decisions for us. And it would certainly help if that electorate and those community participants were had a better understanding and better literacy for space and design and the kind of places we make.
Excellent. That links to some of what the group that Lawrence was talking about in terms of testing out spatial futures. If people just do it in terms of numbers and they've got no sense of scale or space or design. Excellent. Okay, one more, Ian.
Yeah, just coming back to Stephen's talk about value. I think we've got to think about value. Don't just assume that it's about investment can be only delivered through long-term investment. We've got to look at how the valuation system works. We've just commissioned some research into value and where it sits in the supply chain of the development industry to see where it's getting squeezed, where it's actually being accommodated or embraced. And basically the problem is that valuations are not valuations, they're spot pricing. And so therefore, we're happy to externalise things that are of value, the public realm and so on. So until we address that as well, and try to find some other mechanisms of how we accommodate value, and not just call it soft value, I think we've got to look at that as well as an issue. And this research we just commissioned, that'll certainly give us maybe some more kind of material to look at and think about this for the future. So maybe we can bring this back to another.
Adams has just commissioned through other research that seems to be linked to that.
He's looking. No, this is Douglas Wheeler is doing this with Ryan's. David Adams.
He's doing another one for the RTPI.
All right. Okay.
No, not the one you're doing.
No,
he's got a new one on, and it's on the economic role of the planning system.
Well, so I think we need to look at that, and again, maybe look at other models and other...
There's some interesting work the students are doing this morning, looking at public space and landscape and its value to the city, economically and functionally, not simply as a space, but the role that it plays.
Because the thing about that is that it means that other big infrastructure projects can be seen as engineering projects, because it's delivering what's supposedly it's needed to deliver, but because the wider value of that investment is, the softer things that are externalised, even in those projects we can secure, good investment. So I'm not thinking of any major tram projects.
I think you've got...
I mean, I have to say something about the evaluation because I represent the RICS on that score. And I think the problem is that well, I said it myself, value in terms of value of good quality urban design has to be seen in the long run. It's not, we cannot value as valuation surveyors, and I am a valuation surveyor, I cannot value today on a new build. It is just basically fact. What we're looking at is the quality that will mature over time.
It leaches out.
So I have to reflect the market when it's mature over time. So you have to have a bit of faith about growing the value. And please let's get confused about value and cost, because we're really poor in this country. HS2 just now is just utterly pathetic. The tram Edinburgh, utterly pathetic, because we just see it as cost. Scottish Parliament, Well, that might be a bit dodgy, but you know. Who talks about the cost of Scottish Park now? You know, we have to see a long-term value.
It's a sunk investment. Okay, you've had some great discussions, very intelligent probing. I'm going to let you continue. I know some of you got to get trains, but those who want to have a drink and chat. I'm just going to finish before handing back to Sam and thanking him. Last year, some of us went to Lisbon. Portuguese economy, totally car crash. We said, you've got to change all your plans, all these master plans. There are people from Ireland and England and Scotland saying, surely this can't be right. And he said, no, we've got our plans, we've worked them up with communities, we've worked with them in neighbourhoods, we've got cross-sector, we know we have the right plans. All we're going to do is take longer to deliver them. So they had that level of confidence, even in a deep recession where Portugal were in a much worse state than many others. So a lot of this is also about confidence and belief that you've got the mechanisms to work out together. So thanks for your contributions. I'm going to hand back to Hussam before we go for drinks.
Just to say thank you very much for your time. I really enjoy it, and thanks for the workshop and for all the collaborators. Just to mention, Architecture Design Scotland, the Academy of Urbanism, Planning Aid for Scotland, Royal Institute for Chartered Surveyor, and SNEVER. And I would like to say big thanks to Rob and Graham, who really support the event, and for all my colleagues in architecture and planning and geography who really help to shape the program with all our collaborators. We will keep you updated. We will send you the report and all the materials within the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. Please, if you have any feedback or any comments or any things for improvement for future symposium or event, please let us know. I think you've got a little sheet in front of you, but I know it is 5 o'clock and I know everyone is in a hurry to leave. Please come back to us if there is anything. Also, I would like to thank Kevin, my associate, who really kindly sponsored the refreshment, which is outside waiting for all of you. Thank you very much and have a lovely weekend.